Well, hello and welcome to the Power Couple podcast. Today we have the privilege of interviewing Stefan Burns. Stefan is a geophysicist, explorer, and entrepreneur. And I found Stefan actually through YouTube. And I saw one of his videos on the impacts of Starlink mega constellations on our Earth's magnetosphere and climate to be extremely educational and eye opening. He really tied in the aspect of weather, climate, and electromagnetic fields, which is so rarely talked about today in a concise manner. Now, Stefan's journey really catapulted when the world opened her arms to Stefan in 2017 when he was given the opportunity of joining the Science Channel TV show Secrets of the Underground as a co host. From the volcanoes of Italy to the waters of the Caribbean, traveling along the world expanded Stefan's vistas dramatically and fortified his resolve to help others understand the world through the lens of geology and physics. Stefan shares his views on health and wellness, on wild free organic, and more video content as well, which I definitely recommend you check out on Stefan Burns' YouTube channel. Thanks so much, Stefan, for joining us today.
Hey, welcome, and yeah, thanks for the intro and for having me. And looking forward to this to talk EMFs and stuff. A topic I talk less and less about because there's so much to cover as it relates to the geophysical changes on our planet, but a topic that's super, super important for people to be educated on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thanks again. Again, I recommend anybody to go to those videos. We're going to post those in the show notes because Stefan really makes it easy to understand, and that's what we try to do as well. We try to make EMF so simple that even a child can understand them. And if you're joining us for the first time, EMF stands for electromagnetic field, and they surround us everywhere we live. But Stefan, tell people how you got started in the field of geophysics and um, what brought you to this point today.
Yeah, I went to school for geology. Originally, I was going to go to college for history because I have like 20 different things I love. So I could have gone for biology and history, whatever. And I took a geology class at the junior college and I decided to switch majors. So I was going through all the coursework for that. And near the end, I started to get an interest in seismology. So I did a senior thesis on seismic surveying. So I graduated with a BS in geology, but basically with that experience from the senior thesis, I went right away into the workforce doing like basic field work geophysics. Um, and effectively did that ever since. And the geology was almost more supplemental to the geophysics that I was learning, and then also actively, practicing. And that was like my normal job type career until about 2021 when I decided to make a shift for a variety of reasons. And that took me into the wild world of YouTube. And eventually the channel started to do well. And as I learned more and more, I got better with my presentations and I started learning new things and putting things together from a variety of domains that I wasn't really seeing anyone else, at least all that often, kind of bring together. But it's really important to do so, like to be very holistic. I feel like that's a very important thing. And that's kind of how I got there. And yeah, there's just, as it relates specifically like EMFs, electromagnetic fields, they're just really not taught in school, yet we were being bombarded with them all the time from a variety of sources. And our natural EMF environment is so radically different now versus 1850. And basically the millions of years before that, which we evolved in. So it's a huge, huge, huge change. Specifically, certain parts of the light spectrum, like the radio frequency spectrum, have been amplified dramatically in the power density for those frequencies. And so I think that explains so many of the health problems and ailments and symptoms that people have. But as you guys talk about, it's these frequencies are invisible, and you don't necessarily like feel them let's say someone turns 5G on their phone or something. It's not like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, my arm, right? It's like this kind of subtle, like insidious effect. But I think there's ways of also like working with them. There's a nuanced perspective here. You can go non-dualistic with it, but regardless, in general, it's good to be aware of these energies that are being created by man, how the natural EMFs are also changing, and the combination of the two of those together, Earth electrification, which seems to be a process that's unfolding on our planet, the Earth becoming more electrically alive, what that means for us, our health, our wellness, and also just like our society as a whole, climate of the planet, livability. So just doing my best to understand these Earth changes, which we have a big influence on now.
Well, thanks for really grappling with that, because I wonder, why don't more people in the academic realm, more geophysicists, acknowledge the impact of electromagnetic fields? Or we all acknowledge the fact that gravity exists, but electromagnetic fields are trillions and quadrillions times stronger than even gravity. So why do you think there's such hesitation?
Well, I think people get to certain like the right term is not roadblock, but they get to like certain junctions, and then if they stop there, they can sound really smart to 99% of people. But if you're in that 1%, you're like, okay, like you have a lot more research to do. So one of those would be, oh, well, it's non-ionizing radiation, so therefore has zero effect on you. And for anyone that's watching, there's two different types. You could split the light spectrum into ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. It's kind of an arbitrary distinction to some degree, but ionizing radiation is any sort of light photon, if we want to break it down to the smallest quantity or quanta of light. Any light photon that if it hits a molecule, it's strong enough to cause an electron to pop off. And now you have this ionization effect where you've created a positive ion. Let's say we hit hydrogen. Now you have a positive proton floating around because the electron that made it neutral is bounced off, and you also have a negative electron floating around. And this sort of ionizing radiation can, for example, hit a DNA strand and cause a single break or a double break. Double breaks are really bad. Single breaks can be repaired. You get enough of those in general, and you start to have mutations and cancer. And a classic example of receiving a huge dose of ionizing radiation is there's some sort of nuclear problem, and it's pumping out gamma rays, which are the highest frequency of light. They have the shortest wavelength, so they're pulsing trillions of times, or even like septillion or quadrillion, some crazy number. The zeros are astronomical of times per second. That's just like basically hitting all of your molecules in your body, proteins, it's hitting DNA, it's hitting all these different things, causing the break apart, ionize. You become a soup of ions, your body can't repair itself, and then you die. So you have ionizing radiation, that's extreme ultraviolet light, and also like ultraviolet light, extreme ultraviolet light, X-ray light, gamma rays. Then you have non-ionizing radiation, which is visible light, which is what we see. And then you have thermal radiation, you have microwave, lower radio frequency, and then even down into the very low frequency like Schumann resonances and getting close to 0 hertz. That's all non-ionizing radiation. You have that photon hit, it doesn't have enough energy to break a molecular bond via like the kind of the classic understanding of physics. So a lot of these people will get to there and be like, oh, well, a microwave isn't enough to ionize something, so therefore it has no effect, and it's just a thermal effect. And it's like, okay, well, sure, now do the research on all the non-thermal effects that exist. Like you have this microwave energy coming in, which is pulsing, let's say 1 billion times per second with 1 gigahertz. And it's causing a water molecule to basically flip around and rotate, but that's not the only thing it does. There's all these other non-thermal effects. It's not necessarily breaking the bond, but it is causing some energetic state change. But if you just stop at simply, well, it didn't break a DNA bond or something, so you're fine, then you're misguided. So people stop there, and most people aren't aware of the nuance beyond the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing. So then that person can sound smart. Maybe this is my own perception, but I've encountered this many times. They think they're really smart by saying, "Well, it's non-ionizing," and they go beyond that and they're clueless. And then the other roadblock that I find with people in a lot of like academia or just mainstream science, there's so many things to think about: stress, bills, all this stuff. I think they want things to be simple. They don't want to realize that EMFs can be, potentially harmful for health. Is the inverse square law. And it's like, well, okay, here you have this source, like let's say a cell tower, but we have these FCC limits, which by the way are bogus. We all know that. But we have these FCC limits, and via the natural expansion of this electromagnetic energy, it's going to be at these values that are below biologic relevance once you get to the fence surrounding the cell tower, and it'll keep decaying via the inverse square law, so therefore it's no problem. And what we've also seen with a tremendous amount of research, I'm talking people have like, there's hundreds or thousands of papers on this now. Like we've had a lot of people look into us from a variety of angles, and the overall consensus seems to be that the strength of the field also, it is important, but not as important as a lot of people think. Like some of the effects from EMFs can happen at very, very, very low field strengths. So you have not only non-thermal effects where these energies can come in from non-ionizing frequencies and, for example, get absorbed into like water via quantum physics. Like they form these coherency domains. Basically, they can capture onto this energy in a way that is stable and then re-release it later. Then there's also the fact that they can capture onto these energies even if they're at a very weak field strength, and then they can trigger these biologic changes. And so you start to see the picture of, oh, okay, well, if that's all the case, and this massive increase in radiation that we've started, first with the power lines in the sub 100 hertz zone, though some of the harmonics go a little higher than that. But then now with all the radio frequency technologies, especially 5G being the latest, specifically in that zone where water really absorbs it because of its electric susceptibility, now you can see that there's all these problems that exist downstream of that. So yeah, I think that's why a lot of people they get stuck at those two things. They can sound smart to the average person, but if you go beyond that, it's like you have a lot of work to do still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, light and energy are also concepts that when you mention them, people don't think of radiation as light, right? But it's all part of that same spectrum. And if you think about why astronauts age, right? Well, they're going through the space faster, right? And light speeding up. So we're just here in this form of matter because light has slowed down enough for us to experience our existence. But if you like in your example of the gamma rays, that's such an accelerated form of light that now your body is you're speeding up your life process so much that it would make sense just from an abstract concept, right? No studies that your time would speed up, right? Being around those fields, to put it plainly.
That's a
Um,
good way to think about it.
mm-hmm. Right. It's just another way too. That's kind of a fun way in a, in a way, right? Versus the non-ionizing. But yeah, believe me, I've gotten into those arguments with people um, a lot, and yeah, you do need to look past it. It's not just quantity; it's quality, and it's everything. It's the electricity coming off the power grid too that can affect us, and our hearts beat at 1 hertz per second, right? So, and think about how powerful our hearts are, right? So if you have any
Yeah.
interference there, you don't need much. Yeah,
And
go ahead.
actually, with that, I want to say it also takes that mindset shift, right? To want to dig beyond what the manufacturer or the industry is saying. Yeah, it's safe for you. Go right ahead and use it, right? So, I wanted to know if there was a point in your career where this kind of shift might have happened, or were you already off the get go more aware?
Well, I would say it kind of, if I wanted to point to kind of like one moment, is I had my first job in geophysics, and then I got another job, and I was there for 4 years for the second one. And then I just received a new job offer, and I was going to take over the office. This company had an office in California. It was just a single guy running it, but I was going to take that over and eventually bring on some new people. And I was going to be doing geophysical surveys all across the board because they had a variety of clients. But during the interview process, and everything looked great, it was like a huge pay bump and everything. But during the interview process, the guy mentioned that they do a lot of surveys at electrical substations. And I knew enough about EMFs at that point to like know that that was not good. And the guy who was running the office before, I've never met him. I don't know about his life or anything, but he died at like 62 or 64 from cancer. And that's not like super young, but still, he was working that job for like 20 years. So for like from, let's say 40 to 60, I don't know the exact details, but let's say 40 to 60, he's working in these substations quite a bit. And I knew enough to know that there's research linking that to these various things. For example, with young kids, if they are, if their rooms are near power lines, they've done studies showing that there's an increase in leukemia with young kids due to power line radiation, which is in the United States, 60 hertz. In Europe, it's 50 hertz. These are frequencies that naturally overlap with the resonant frequencies of ions like calcium, sodium, potassium, and more. The specific term or terminology is known as ion cyclotron resonance. But if you have a potassium ion, so like K plus, or a sodium ion, Na plus, it has this frequency that if you all of a sudden have that frequency there, it'll resonate with it, and then that can trigger changes with say like a voltage gate can then open up and allow these potassium ions to flow out. And now you're changing the voltage gradients of like the larger cell group, and this can trigger changes in the expression of DNA and cell behavior and all this stuff. So I didn't know that at the time, but it's like something's off with this job, and I don't want to have to be wearing basically like tin foil all day at these substations. And I was like, it's something, I just follow my intuition. Something's a little off there. I did a lot more research. Because then I pivoted over to traveling around the world and doing YouTube, building the YouTube channel. And I figured, I basically called that like my sabbatical. And so I just did a tremendous amount of research on a huge variety of topics during that because I had all the time in the world. And then I was able to look back and be like, I definitely made the right decision. Because I did a lot of research into EMFs, and I produced quite a few videos on that back in 2022, 2023, and I still do every now and then. But that was definitely like a big research focus of mine. The 18 months after I turned that job down.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really important. And I think like one example I can share, just like a real world example, is I met with a friend yesterday, and I only met her once before, so it's not like we're like we know everything about each other. And we hung out all day, and then at the end of the day, I mentioned, I was like, has your phone been on the whole time? She's like, yeah, no problem. She has an iPhone. I was like, well, just to let you know, I'm fine. Like, don't worry about this. Don't freak out about this. But just to let you know, bring awareness to this is that you have an iPhone, you have the latest iPhone, whatever. You've brought 5G into our environment for the entire day. Because did you ever turn on airplane mode once? She's like, no, it's been on receiving the whole time. So you brought in not only the 5G being emitted from the phone, because there's always 5G in the environment now, typically, unless you're way out in the countryside. But your phone is the emitter, right? It has to speak to these towers. So it's blasting the signal off. Also, Bluetooth is on, Wi-Fi is on, right? You shouldn't need any of those on for 99% of our day. So you brought locally into our little zone all these frequencies, and they don't need to be there. And this is when we were at like the park, so it's pretty isolated, actually, like a nice natural environment. But even there, her phone was like this little emitter, and she's like, wait, well, your phone hasn't been on? I'm like, well, it's been on, but it's been on airplane mode, so I've had all those things turned off. And then she was able to clue in really quickly, like, okay, yeah, this makes sense, like, thanks for letting me know, now I can be more mindful of that. She just simply didn't know. But that's like a real example of how these things are kind of insidious, and you may not even know how you're exposing yourself if you don't think about it really clearly like that. But that's effectively what happened. She created this high frequency bubble around us the entire time, for the entire day. It didn't matter where we went. There was this pulsating electromagnetic energy just propagating out around her phone for the entire day.
Yeah. And even, again, human nature, the sad thing too is that it's great that it connected for her, but then some that take that in. So yeah, okay, I can see that could be a problem. But the addiction aspect, the worry aspect, what if somebody needs to get a hold of me, this, that, the other, that's so been infiltrated as well with these devices that we've been given and have been told that are safe to use, right? So there's so many layers to it, and and not to lay blame. It's a struggle that's been put at our feet, very over a very short period of time.
Yeah, very short period.
People have become addicted to their fear, if that's
Yeah.
possible, right? Because it's almost like, when 9/11 happened, I remember, there in the news cycle, there was never any um, big catastrophes. It was, maybe the convenience store got, robbed, or a cat got stuck in a tree, right, or something like that. But then after that, it was one catastrophe after another. And yeah, anyway, I think, yeah, there's definitely that psychological aspect where people feel like they need to be constantly connected, but then they're
Mm-hmm.
disconnecting altogether. um, so to go on to a little different topic with the satellites right now, where are we at? Because we have Musk, of course, who's ruling the America. I don't know what's going on, but those satellites are still going up. I think their aim, at least Starlink, is about 42,000, and then there's other mega constellations that are going up. Um, what are some of the key points maybe we can cover with um, these mega constellations, and how they're disrupting, why people should really be concerned? What's the primary reason people should be concerned? I know there's many concerns, but maybe you can break that down a little.
Yeah, so to be clear, some of this is intelligent speculation, you could say. We don't, systems are complex, so we don't know it's going to turn out exactly like this, but in general, 1 + 2 + 3 = 6. So it's like we're able to do the math fairly simply. So there's a few things. It's like just like EMFs. Before 1850, 1850 is probably a little early, but let's just say 1850. Before 1850, the only electromagnetic fields were being produced naturally. So we had the sun producing all the different wavelengths of light. And so that's primarily thermal, like infrared, visible, and ultraviolet. And then it also produces extreme ultraviolet and X-ray light, which gets absorbed into the upper atmosphere. So you're not getting that at the surface. Only with like the biggest solar flares is it producing gamma rays. So most of the gamma rays are actually coming off of like the galactic center, and those are also being absorbed into the uppermost atmosphere. So you're not receiving those at the surface unless it's very rare situations like a huge gamma ray burst, which aren't that common. And then the sun, though, also creates and emits a lot of radio frequencies. So this is like solar radio flux. And so before 1850, our primary exposure to these radio frequencies was from the sun. And this is all the 4G, 5G wavelengths and stuff. It was from the sun. It's also from Jupiter. Jupiter also has these auroral radio emissions, and it's able to pierce through our upper atmosphere. And there's stories of people, they're on a lonely country road and they tune into Jupiter and hear these crazy things.
Really?
So those are the natural sources of radio frequencies. And then if you go even lower down, we had the Schumann resonances. And if you have like a thunderstorm nearby, these lightning strikes, they create light or electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum. Basically, a superbolt can also produce like gamma rays. So that'd actually be your most common source of that. And so you can have these transient pulses of just light energy that you're being hit with because, let's say, you have a lot of thunderstorm activity nearby for a day, a week, or month, whatever. But in general, the environment was pretty quiet, and the main light radiation that we were receiving was infrared, visible, and ultraviolet from the sun. Those were the main ones. Then we turned on basically the power grids, and so we started receiving all these low frequency emissions, 50, 60 hertz, and then some of the harmonics and some like train systems run at like 21.7 or something like that. This low frequency stuff. Because a direct current, which is what Tesla was working with, or Edison was working with, these produce static magnetic fields, whereas this alternating current produces the pulsed magnetic fields, which naturally don't really show up in our environment on Earth. But then we turn all those on, then we start turning on the radio stuff in kilohertz range, megahertz range, gigahertz range now. So that's been the story. Since the advent of, let's say, 1950, I think it's 57 for Sputnik, but then we started having the space age, and we started putting all these things up into space. So before that, the only satellites that we had was, we have one satellite, that's the moon. And if we had anything hit our atmosphere, it's just any little asteroids or things that burn up, any sort of meteorites that come in, they burn up in a certain part of the atmosphere called the ablation zone. But if you look at the Earth, it goes from solid to then you have some liquid around it too, with like the oceans, but then you have gas. So it gets less and less dense as you go further out from the Earth, because the less dense something is, the more energized it is, and therefore the better able it is to resist the force of gravity, because it's more electromagnetic and less gravitational based. So as you go further out, the density drops a lot, but the energy goes up. And so now we've taken all these really dense things, basically these metallic satellites, and we've been able to launch them into these semi-stable orbits around the Earth just because we put a ton of energy behind them through the rocket launch. And now the rate of material that is re-entering into our atmosphere and ablating into that meteorite ablation zone, which is like 70 to 90 kilometers up, which is right at the lower part of the ionosphere, which is made up of ions, which are charged particles, so like electrons and then protons. So therefore they can have these electric currents, which can generate magnetic fields and geomagnetic storms, right? Now we have greater ablation into that zone from satellites and such than we do naturally. Of course, there's going to be variations naturally, because sometimes you may go through like a meteor stream like the Taurids or something. But in general, now we are outpacing that natural flow. And these meteorites are made up of also like metals and stuff. And so these are conductive ions, because when they vaporize, you're basically creating a whole bunch of ions. Some of them will connect into oxygen and bind with like ozone and, let's say, create some sort of iron oxide dust that will slowly rain down, but it's a natural process that is not too much for us to handle. But now these satellites are going up and we're putting ever more and more of them. Starlink is starting to have like 3 to 4 to 5 reentries per day as we film this. Their lifespan is only set for 5 years. And so not only do they want to increase the size of their constellation from, it's a bit more than 8,000 now, but they want to get that to 40,000 as you stated at the beginning. But they're going to have to keep replenishing them. So it's not like we put 40,000 up and eventually we have 40,000 rain down. What's the geophysical effects of that? It's no, we want 40,000 up there all the time. The actual churn may eventually reach 50,000, 100,000 or more if this goes completely unchecked. That is likely to strengthen the ionosphere and make it more ionized, because you're creating all these new charge carriers, because you have aluminum burning up and becoming Al3+, and a lot of them will bind to ozone and then it'll become like aluminum oxide or something. It's going to degrade the ozone layer further, which is a big issue in and of itself. But in general, you're going to have probably a more electrically charged ionosphere. And that's the part of the Earth geophysically that in large part determines the effects of a geomagnetic storm. So the sun occasionally does these big explosions called solar flares, and it can launch plasma our way. Plasma is just a whole bunch of charge carriers, these ions. And when that hits Earth's magnetic field, it can bring a lot of energy into the Earth system, into the plastosphere. And that can then rain down into the ionosphere and create these really powerful electric currents, which then generate magnetic fields. And it's those magnetic fields that re-register at the surface, not magnetic perturbations way out at the magnetopods at 5 Earth radii or 10 Earth radii. It's the ones generated in the ionosphere that actually cause these magnetic field swings at the surface. And those, through the laws of electromagnetism, electric fields create magnetic fields create electric fields. And so a geomagnetic storm can create these geomagnetically induced currents. Anything that's really conductive will host those currents. We see this with solar storm impacts, is that we can get big GICs, these geomagnetically induced currents, and they can overload a power system. Because if the voltage differential gets too high, you can't manage it, you can't balance it out, and you can get these power grid collapses that happened in 1989 in Quebec with a really big solar storm impact. It appears that we just had that happen recently in Puerto Rico, because we had a G4 storm come in, and right at the maximum magnetic field swing displacement, you could say, that's when Puerto Rico went offline. And Puerto Rico is actually fairly far south, so these currents are weaker the closer you get to the equator, but they also have a very fragile power grid, so it makes sense that they were more susceptible. But the kind of the bigger picture is that by putting all this stuff in space to increase our ability to communicate and send information around and everything, these satellites are beaming that information using these radio frequencies as well. So not only do we have these towers on the ground hitting us with this, we're actually having it beamed down from space, from these mega constellations, of which there's only one right now, Starlink, but soon there will be, probably dozens of them from a variety of companies. They're also, through this ablation process and the planned reentries, and sometimes unplanned reentries, a geomagnetic storm can knock these satellites offline and cause them to then fall into the atmosphere, ablate, and break up. It is going to very likely, via that mechanism, progressively make geomagnetic storms stronger and stronger and stronger, because again, it's the electric properties of the ionosphere that create the magnetic field swings. And so if you have just stronger electric currents in the ionosphere, because you have more ions from these satellites ablating, then those magnetic field swings, not only do they go down, they also go up. That can cause charging within the satellites. They can then fail as a result. More reentries. It's like this positive feedback loop. And then you very likely will have stronger geomagnetically induced currents at the surface, which could overload power grids. And so by actually putting more and more technology up in space, we're very likely going to cause our technological systems to become less and less resilient. So the opposite of anti-fragility. And that is a problem that, and let alone, and not even discussing again the impacts on ozone and the additional radio frequency emissions that these satellite constellations are producing directly across the entire surface of the Earth. That creates like these magnetic ducts, and it gets wild. There's a whole bunch of things, but no one is really discussing that. A few people have, but in general, most people are clueless, like the average person, and rightly so. I mean, this isn't up their alley. And then the people that should know better don't seem to actually know better as it relates to us being citizens and protectors of the Earth. It seems that there's some sort of malicious, insidious force, like some dark psychic force or something that's can capture these people, because I mean, it's not like I have a PhD in this stuff. I've just done a lot of research into it, and have I have one good head on my shoulders at least. So, but there's a lot of other smart people out there, but they seem to not be raising the alarm. So there's something there. I don't know what it is, but it's a significant, I think this is a very significant thing and shouldn't be underestimated. And that is going to increase as we go into the future. So that's a pretty big problem as I see it. And I hope this analysis is wrong, but the initial indication is that these geomagnetic storms are becoming stronger from weaker solar storm impacts. And we're right now at the point where the number of satellites is going up exponentially, and the rate of reentries is also going up exponentially. So it seems that we're right now at that inflection point. So that's kind of troubling.
Wow. And the auroras too. In your video, you're explaining that how they can be caused by potentially because they have a stronger magnetic field. So that could also explain why people are seeing more auroras
Further south.
right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a difficult thing to be precise with. That could be an explanation. A lot of people reported that. I also think that it can be mostly explained via more conventional understandings. So for example, solar cycle 24 was the last one we had, which was the early 2010s. It's like 2011, 2012, that type of time frame. It was quite a bit weaker than the solar cycle preceding, which was the early 2000s. And we actually never had a G5 storm for solar cycle 24. So if I think back to the year 2000 with solar cycle 23, I'm like 9 years old or something, right? I don't have an iPhone. The camera on a cell phone is awful. And so like not many people were able to get photos of aurora. Now everyone has a long exposure camera in their pocket. And we didn't get any storms that would trigger significant enough aurora across the globe for people, in 2012, maybe that's like the iPhone 4 or something, like that time frame. I don't exactly remember, but the solar cycle 24, maybe we would have started to see people post about these things on social media. This is the first solar cycle that we've had social media be a big thing with. And it's been a fairly strong solar cycle, fairly similar to 23, a little bit weaker. We've had 2 G5 storms and a lot of G4 storms. So we've had the opportunity for people and better education about this through my channel and other people and whatever, right? They know that there's likely to be aurora. They've been given the clue to go outside, look north. They take their phone, it's on long exposure automatically. Now they get video of aurora. And so I think there's also the observer effect of how many people, we just have more data points now. And so it seems that the aurora are going further south. I think that's probably 90% of the explanation. But this satellite and geomagnetic storm feedback loop also would contribute to that, and it makes sense. But I think that effect it's more of a forecast out. Maybe at the next solar cycle, if this whole satellite mega constellation madness continues, maybe at the next solar cycle, that will really, if it's a strong one, that effect will really make itself evident. There's a variety of explanations for why the aurora we're seeing further south. I think just what I laid out with the cameras and people being more aware of this because of social media and more, I think that explains most of it. But yeah, these sort of geomagnetic variations are going to become more and more global as the ionosphere gets stronger and stronger, and as we have more of this radiation being, artificially created at the surface. Because normally the magnetic field fluctuations on the globe are strongest in the polar regions. That's where the particles are flowing down. But if you have more of these like ducts all across the globe because of power line harmonic resonance and because of these extremely high frequency microwave emissions in the gigahertz range, kind of creating these zones where ions can go in, then that feasibly could also create aurora more globally. So I think we're really going to see that probably with the next solar cycle in a very definitive way.
Yeah, it's almost like the more people take pictures, the stronger the ionosphere gets, because more people have phones that depend on the satellites. So
Yeah.
it's like you have this meeting of light versus dark, right? Like this dark force, and you have the light that's coming in to stream in to show us our darkness from that outer space and to challenge us if we're open to that truth. With it's not just a cute aurora, it's your destruction if you're not if you don't open your eyes to potentially what you're doing. So I think that's kind of a cool, you know, universe has a smart sense of humor with us. Um, but I also wanted to ask you, what about potential fires breaking out? If there's a huge magnetic CME or coronal mass ejection, um, and you know, and now you have these power lines and everything's electrified. Um, you know what I mean? Like, isn't that also a risk that basically everything can just catch on fire?
Yeah, I guess so. If you were to have power lines get overloaded and something sparks up or something like that, yeah, eventually, if you start getting sparks flying somewhere, then yeah, that's the recipe for how we normally get fires, is that there's usually high winds and that brings a power line or two down, and then the flames are stoked by the wind.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I haven't really considered the fire aspect to it, but if the geomagnetically induced currents are strong enough, it's certainly possible. And it a lot of the a lot of how strong a geomagnetic storm is depends on the magnetic field characteristics of the coronal mass ejection, this blob of plasma that's flying through space. Um, it needs certain magnetic field characteristics to connect to Earth's magnetic field. Um, but if you do get that connection, if the Earth is already supercharged, you could say, and more electrically alive, then it'll take that energy and run with it faster and run with it more. And yeah, then you could see these geomagnetically induced currents be stronger across the globe and also be stronger at lower latitudes where more people live. And then, yeah, you could very potentially have that sort of effect with it then going down into the more human domain of like, we have a fire now barreling down on our house. Like that's a serious thing. So yeah, there's so that's the thing. There's so many runaway consequences with this that if you just look at this from like one perspective, you can maybe like rationalize it away. But if you start just simply doing the thought experiments out, as you just did with the fire risk, then you start to see, okay, it's actually a lot of risk here because it's not just one risk factor. It's actually like this one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Oh, okay, we should really reconsider what we're doing here. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, well put. And is there any projects that you're working on right now that you want to tell people about, or anything new you're getting involved in, or field you're looking into, other than the one you're looking into right now?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm covering Earth electrification on my channel because I think this is a larger impulse that the Earth is going through that we're a part of because we are creating these electromagnetic fields and increasing the overall vibration of our environment. And so I think this is like some sort of evolutionary impulse. And the key to working with that beneficially is to just be very mindful and aware of that's happening, and to do the wellness practices that'll keep you bioelectrically grounded. So you can learn more about Earth electrification on my YouTube channel, which is simply just at Stefan Burns, StefanBurns. That's just my name. And then I do have a website where I have, for example, grounding shoes. And grounding is the best way to balance yourself bioelectrically. You simply connect to the Earth conductively. Our hands, our feet are very conductive. So going out to the park and walking around barefoot is a great way to do that, or even like throwing a blanket out, natural fiber, laying down on that, do some deep grounding. There's a variety of ways to do it. Swimming in the ocean is excellent. But one of the main things that's disconnected us is our shoes. And all of us have chores to do and errands to run. And so to swap your shoes out from electrically resistive rubber to earthing shoes that have a conductive sole, not just a copper plug at the K1 point, but the entire sole of the shoe is conductive. That's a really smart thing to do. I myself have noticed a big difference with that because I got into earthing and grounding more than 5 years ago. I was looking for these sort of products. I couldn't find one that was actually intelligently designed with electromagnetism in mind. A lot of them were kind of gimmicky. They were just like capitalizing on the fact the people that were designing them hadn't done the research. So now I have the earthing shoes that actually have a conductive leather sole, much more conductive at least than rubber. Still fairly resistive compared to, let's say, like your hand, your palm, but compared to rubber, it's orders of magnitude more conductive. Still has a K1 copper plug. If you wear those more often during your day-to-day, you remediate the effects of all these radio frequency and microwave emissions and the power line emissions and all that. And then I think you can start to more beneficially thrive, you could say, in this higher vibrational environment that we're creating, and that doesn't seem is going to change anytime soon. It's likely it's going to get more and more vibratory. And so I think the earthing and grounding is super, super, super important, however you do that. So those are available on my website at wildfreeorganic.com, and I recommend people look into it. I just released some earthing sandals, and so those are awesome. So that's something that I have to support people. And I highly recommend that people, at a minimum, start to do earthing and grounding more often, barefoot, swimming in the ocean, whatever it is. It's all super good for you.
Yeah, and I would add, just to be a devil's advocate, knowing about EMF, I agree with you. I think the ocean is a fantastic source to insulate ourselves from electric frequencies, but there is also the currents that do run along the ground with the power grid, depending on where you
Yeah,
are, right?
yeah,
So it's
that's
something
true.
to be aware of. Earthing sheets also, that can be problematic if you're, so just be aware of your environment, like Stefan said, right? I mean, bodies of water are fantastic. And, if you're in a place where that, there's not a lot of power lines, it's just becoming such an issue now. I have a colleague who he measured ground current in the middle of the Arizona desert.
Oh,
So yeah, and not to put a kibosh on what you just said. I mean, I believe in earthing too, in terms of if I know I'm in a safe area,
Mhm.
but it's just raising awareness about all this stuff, because the utilities, they never provided a neutral wire to go back to the substation, right? They just spiked all these ground rods in the ground, and so that's my only
At least in
only
North
kind of, at
America.
least in North America.
Right.
Yeah, but then there's, yeah, to my knowledge.
yeah, the circuit needs to be completed. So you have the energy running back from the local source where you are effectively back to the substation or the power generation area in some way. And yeah, that's why I just draw a distinction between earthing and grounding, because grounding is literally just connecting to something else that's conductive. Earthing is the greater philosophy of being mindful of your environment, making sure it's like a natural environment. And I think this wellness practice, like, you're very much benefited from developing your intuition here and just feeling the environment. Like, it can become a pretty subconscious process. You're not having to overthink it at some point, but there is a little bit of a learning curve, and it's best to like not to give this like the respect that it's due. Um, and yeah, in general though, in general, I do think equalizing your charge to the potential Earth, even in an area that may have some of these return currents, is better than letting the charge build up, because that's like more free radical activity. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't be grounding underneath the high voltage lines directly or anything like that. Or if you're in maybe like a hot spot, that's definitely an area to avoid. And that's where you start to hopefully develop a sense for this, where the invisible becomes visible, and you can be like, okay, something feels a little off here.
Mhm.
That was my experience with the earthing sheets. Everyone tells you to plug it into your house. That's the worst thing you can do. And almost no one, 99% of the time, that does not work out well for you, because you're connecting to this huge antenna that has a whole bunch of extra currents on it, and most houses bleed their oscillations onto the ground. And so in general, that's the one problem with the earthing and grounding industry, is like there's all these different companies that provide these products for you for that, but then most of them again haven't done the due diligence and are actually like, most people are being exposed to more EMFs by plugging in with the earthing sheet. It's really unfortunate, because you think that the people that are out there to help you with these products, like the sheets and everything, the mats, they really aren't. And also most of them are really poorly designed. but that's a whole other podcast. But they sell these mats. It's just like some cheap piece of flimsy leather. It's not even like some like conductive material like it should be for the mat, which would be, I guess, some sort of carbon-based material. Because metal would eventually like oxidize. I mean, if you really are serious, you would get like a copper plate that you could put your feet on, connect that to a ground rod that you place yourself outside. But I think the best way, again, is earthing, actually just going out to a natural place rather than trying to, MacGyver some sort of solution where you're grounded, but you're still in a noisy environment because you have the Wi-Fi and 10 smart devices all around you, but now you're grounded. And
yeah, you're introducing more frequencies. That's why you tell people with shielding electromagnetic fields in their house to be very careful, especially in the bedroom, because you could be introducing even more frequencies depending on your wiring and everything else. So yeah, I think your approach, taking a holistic approach, listening to your intuition, is really the best strategy, right? We just have to learn how to tap into that more often.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stefan. And again, what is the name of your site again?
Yeah, wildfreeorganic.com.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And remember,
You are more powerful than you know.